In the world of personal defense training, there's a lot of confusion regarding the role of gross motor skills versus fine motor skills. I'll give you the lowdown on this episode of Tactical Tidbits. Guys, please help me make the world a safer place by liking, subscribing, following, and of course, sharing these videos. All right. Now, there's a lot of controversy behind today's topic, mostly due to a lot of misinformation that is in part due to a lot of misconceptions about this issue. So let's begin by defining our terms. What are gross motor skills and fine motor skills? Well, simply put, gross motor skills are movements that require the use of a large muscle or muscle groups. In contrast, fine motor skills are movements that require the use of a small muscle or muscles. Now, a couple of examples of each would be for gross motor, something like raising your hand or pushing something with your arms or using your entire body. And for fine motor examples would be things like pushing a large button or pulling a trigger, right? Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, except that things can get a little bit more complicated when you're deciding what types of these two movements are preferable when you're trying to learn something new. For our purposes, we'll keep it to personal defense. Now, that could be either empty hand techniques or the use of a firearm. Now, the common arguments go like this. One school of thought is that since humans to a large degree experience the inability to use fine motor skills during a fear spike or adrenaline dump, then one should focus on gross motor movements. The other school of thought posits that fine motor skills are okay to train given that there are plenty of examples of professionals executing fine motor movements under extreme stress. According to the adherents of this point of view, it's just all a matter of reps and training. So, who's right? Well, they're both right and they're both wrong in a way. The mainstream approach to training ignores a few other realities of human physiology. See, while it's true that humans' ability to perform fine motor skills suffer significantly under stress, that's not the end of the story. More on that in a minute. And for proponents of fine motor skills, yes, it is possible to train a fine motor skill to the point that one can perform at least adequately under stress. The problem is that when one looks at all of their examples of that, they're all either professionals or experts who have put in thousands of hours and spent thousands of dollars training in that skill. Why is that a problem? You might already be anticipating the answer, but I'll expound on that as well. See, gross and fine motor skills can be further divided into two more categories: simple and complex. A simple motor skill is one that is easy and natural to perform. Now look at the matrix here. We have simple motor skills that are both fine and gross. Now let's look at complex motor skills. These are skills that are more complicated due to the fact that they are not natural to our physiology and they must be learned and trained, whether fine or gross. See the problem yet? The bigger issue is between simple and complex, isn't it? Not between fine and gross. We must understand that when we're trying to learn a complex body movement, whether fine or gross, it will require a significant amount of training to perform it well, even without stress. Now, a quick note on the simple fine box. These can easily become complex as one adds, complexity. Pushing one large button or jerking a trigger once or even repeatedly is simple. However, adding several buttons, especially small buttons, and having to press them in a particular sequence would bring this movement up to complex. Similarly, a deliberate trigger press straight to the rear, ending flat, and then releasing it just enough to reset it is a complex movement. Does that make sense? All right. Think which category would be most difficult to perform if someone had a gun to your head and told you to perform it perfectly or they would shoot you. It would definitely be fine complex, followed by gross complex, then fine simple, and finally gross simple. So since we're talking about personal defense here, allow me to explain how this concept comes into play. If someone wants to be the next MMA champion or the next John Wick, in other words, professionals or experts, the complexity issue would be moot. That would mean that they would be ready and willing to spend the time and money necessary to achieve that goal. However, if you consider the fact that most people who train in personal defense are regular folks who simply want to be safer and don't have the time or money to become professional fighters or competition shooters, then their training should exclude complex movements as much as possible, generally speaking, of course. Now, this is especially the case in empty hand self-defense, given that you're only using body movements. So they should be as natural as possible if one is expected to learn them without much training. Okay, well, when it comes to using a firearm, however, it's a little different because we're now using a complex tool. So by definition, many of the required skills might fall under the complex category. In this case, we must teach gross motor skills whenever possible. Again, I'm talking in general here. Now, there are no absolutes and there are always trade-offs. It all depends on context and need. This is a responsibility on the part of the student to be self-aware enough about their level of commitment to the training, as well as a responsibility on the part of an instructor to know his clientele and the needs and limitations of his students. Now, this is just scratching the surface on this subject, but you can learn all the details and a lot more if you come train with us. I'd love to have you in a class. Come check out our schedule at alpha1tactical.com and follow us on social media. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.